Floriade Knowledge Exchange Program. This is a joint collaboration on growing green cities. We have a really packed and amazing program for today, starting with an amazing presentation by Josh Colchester on the value of systems thinking for growing green cities. After that, we will go towards a workshop on how to apply this within 3 different teams. And at the end, we have a small reflection. In between, the workshop itself consists of 2 parts, an eco part and an ego part. And in between the 2 parts, we have a beautiful transition. And then without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Josh to share with us his knowledge on the value of systems thinking for growing green cities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dina. Great to be here. Have this opportunity to talk on this topic. So as Dina said, I'm going to give a presentation. I'm Joss. Maybe you know me. I'm with the Systems Innovation London Hub. I also set up Systems Innovation a number of years ago. Today, I'm going to talk about growing green cities with systems thinking before we jump into our workshop afterwards, just to give a bit of context to the topic here. So here we are. Let me put full screen. Hopefully you can see my screen. That's correct. All good? Can you see my full screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, great. Okay, so maybe this is what a green city, I don't know if you've been to Singapore. This is actually Singapore. It's a beautiful city, the way they've integrated the ecosystem. They live in a jungle. Actually, Yan is lived in Singapore for a long time. She'll know about this. They've done an amazing job of integrating. Actually, well, they live on a tropical island, really, and they've done an amazing job of integrating that with the urban environments. So it looks something like this, and that's what we're talking about today. But I wanted to start with this quote. I think it's quite a powerful quote from Carl Sagan. He's a 20th century scientist, quite well known, a famous scientist. And he says, the beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. So it kind of captures the essence of systems thinking, that it's about the way parts are organized into overall systems and what emerges when you put things together in a particular way, in a kind of synergistic way. So it's trying to shift our focus, as we'll talk about in this presentation, from looking at those atoms, looking at those individual parts and saying, what happens? Sometimes when we put those parts together, kind of magical things happen, right? This thing here, a living system, it's totally different from the stones and the soil and so forth around it. And what we're saying here is that kind of living aspect, that amazing quality of being a living system emerges out of the way that we put things together. And that's really core to systems thinking. I think it's going to be core to growing green cities. It's going to be core to growing regenerative and sustainable cities. It's not going to be about just planting lots of trees. It's actually going to be about, as we'll talk about here, kind of changing the structures and systems in cities in the way that's needed to get the emergence of regenerative and sustainable systems. So this is what Greta Thunberg has to say on the subject. I saw a presentation by her a couple of years ago in Poland, and she was saying, if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. And that's pretty core to the whole idea of systems change and systems innovation. It's recognizing that maybe what we have, the systems we have, aren't kind of working on a fundamental level. We aren't going to get these regenerative, sustainable green cities improving or tweaking or incremental innovations within the structures that we have, within the paradigm that we have, right? Our ways of thinking, our ways of organizing. And as she's saying here, we want to live in this sustainable world. Maybe we need to change the system. And she's not the only one talking like that. More and more people are saying that, there's something fundamental has to change about the way we think about and organize and design the systems we form part of. And there's this kind of growing language around systems change in many different areas. And it's really the question of how do we actually change the system instead of simply making improvements within the existing model. A lot of this has to do with the kind of recognition around the underlying kind of complexity of the world we live in and the systems we now form part of. And the challenges we face are what we call wicked problems. This is a new word that's kind of entered our vocabulary in the past couple of decades. Starting to see problems as interdependent, involving significant levels of uncertainty, and most of all, complexity. So we're starting to really look at and kind of recognize the complexity of the challenges we face, and the complexity of trying to develop a sustainable regenerative city. And that complexity kind of changes a lot of things. And this is one of the challenges that cities face going forward is climate change, right? It's a very complex issue. It kind of cuts across many different traditional domains. Flooding like this is not one part of the system that's going to be affected, not one part of the city. It's actually going to cut across all different areas of the city. It's going to affect everyone. And that makes it a highly complex issue. And if we are to respond successfully to climate change, it will require fundamental changes in the systems that make up our cities to make them adaptive and resilient. So in the face of a growing recognition to the systemic complex nature of these challenges and the need for transformational change rather than incremental change, the term systems change has arisen as an approach to enabling systemic transformation towards sustainable solutions. And it's ultimately about changing the structure of systems, starting to look at and recognize and understand, and then being able to work with the structure of systems, something we're not very good at actually in our organizations, in how we do management, in how we organize ourselves. We're not good at looking at the structure of the systems we form part of. We're much better at making changes within those existing structures, but we're starting to recognize actually the whole structure of the system needs to change. And this is what systems change is about: systems innovation, seeing those structures that we form part of in our cities, in our organizations, and thinking about how we actually change the structure of those. And that's kind of the essence of systems innovation. It's not something we're very good at, actually. It's a capacity that we need to learn as individuals, as organizations, as societies, across many different levels. But it's kind of the project of systems innovation. And when I say changing system structure, just to kind of bring that down to ground, I think this is maybe the simplest example in this context. Shifting from a linear to a circular economy would be an example of you're actually changing an underlying structure in the system. And we know this is going to have to happen if we are to move towards a regenerative, sustainable model in our system, in our cities. It's not going to be kind of trees all over the place. It's actually, we're going to have to make these more fundamental shifts in how we deal with resources, and how we deal with water, energy, materials, and so forth. So that's what I mean when I say structural or systems change, an actual change in the structure of the system. And it's not easy, as we know. And it has to happen across multiple dimensions, not actually just the flow of energy and materials and so forth. It's actually across, our economies and the way we organize kind of politically and so forth. But to do it, it requires at least two aspects. We need to be thinking differently, and we need to be organizing, right? That circular economy is actually a new way of organizing. So we actually need to organize systems in new ways, but really to get there, you need to be thinking differently, because the way we organize, the way we manage, the way we design, the way we develop our cities and organizations and so forth is really a function of our thinking at the end of the day. So if we want that paradigm shift in outcomes, in organization, it's really going to be traced back to kind of how we're thinking, the way we're looking at the world. And that's the systems thinking part of it. It's saying a lot of the traditional ways of thinking are actually really failing us when it comes to dealing with these wicked problems, with complexity of the challenges we face. And our kind of traditional ways of thinking, as Einstein said, it'll lead us back, it leads back to the same old model or create the same old problems systemically. So we're asking for a different kind of way of thinking, but just to kind of clarify, what is that? What do I mean by a traditional way of thinking? And it's characterized as being reductionist. Maybe you've heard of this word, kind of a big idea indeed. It's a whole paradigm. It's a worldview. And it's quite dominant in our modern world. It rose with the rise of modern science some 400 or 500 years ago. Mr. René Descartes was kind of a founding figure. There were many others, Sir Isaac Newton. To look at the world in this very mechanistic way. And we call it a mechanistic worldview, a Newtonian paradigm, or reductionist worldview. René Descartes argued the world was like a machine. Its pieces, like clockwork mechanisms, but the machine could be understood by taking its pieces apart, studying them, and then putting them back together to see the larger picture. So this is kind of the story of modern science under a reductionist worldview, and it's really because that way of thinking, science is very much at the heart of modern societies. It kind of extends to how we do management and design and kind of all spheres, really. This idea that the world can be kind of broken up into individual parts and studied. It's atomistic, and it's also this kind of linear worldview. That once we separate out all the parts, we can start to find these kind of linear interactions of cause and effect between those. It's an analytical worldview. We start kind of taking the parts and trying to analyze and understand their properties and drilling down. And we know that's kind of been the enterprise of modern science, right? We've kept on drilling down and down till we got to molecules and atoms and quarks and so on. And it's helped us in many ways, but it's also resulted kind of in a world that looks a bit like this, right? This is really an expression of reductionism, right? We reduce systems down to kind of monodimensional modes of operating. And we're saying maybe there's a different way of looking at things, and maybe if we want really different outcomes, we might need to look at the world in very different ways. And a lot of this starts with kind of a recognition that maybe the world isn't a machine. Maybe it's not really like that with all those cogs, kind of one thing affecting another, and we can take the whole thing apart. Maybe not everything can be understood. Maybe some things can be understood like that, but maybe not everything. And some things we're starting to recognize are actually complex, and they aren't really like clocks. Clocks are kind of simple. Some things look a bit more like this. They're big kind of networks of interacting and interdependent, adapting and evolving over time. And they have very different characteristics to what a clock has, in the way that we can take a clock apart and we can kind of change it and we can fix it, so on and so forth. And maybe some systems aren't like that. And this is a very different way of looking at the world, in contrast to the reductionist thinking, which is kind of breaking things down and separating them out and studying the parts. This is kind of what we call an emergent way of looking at the world. But think about what happens instead of taking things apart. What happens when we put them together? Going back to that plant and what Carl Sagan was saying, something emerged when we put all those atoms together. They're just carbon atoms, the carbon molecules, put together in a particular way, and we got the emergence of life. So we're kind of saying that's an interesting thing. And this reductionism, it's not really going to help us understand that, because it's always breaking things down. So what happens when we put things together in specific ways? We get this idea of emergence. We look here at how small parts combine in synergistic ways to form new patterns and levels of organization. So instead of reducing everything down to one level, we're asking, actually, we put things together, maybe new levels, new dimensions emerge, and that's interesting. We want to look at that, we want to think about that. And this is what we call systems thinking, this holistic way of looking at the world. This, call it synthetic also, right? Synthesis, putting things together instead of dividing them up. So this is a different worldview, and we're saying maybe from this worldview, we could get very different outcomes. We could get systems change. If we started looking at the system very differently, that would start to result in very different ways of organizing and managing and so forth, and kind of system change you might want. So systems change kind of fundamentally characterized as being a holistic view of the world, which means that we're always looking at things in relation to the whole they form part of. Instead of taking it and dividing it up and trying to understand the parts and how they interrelate, we're saying we take this thing and we try to understand it in the whole, the broader environment that it forms part of. And that's a different way of looking at the world. And it helps us to see and work with systems and their structure to avoid just changes in parts. And it's not magic. It looks a bit like this. There's different kind of dimensions to it. You can learn it. And we do a lot of teaching you about that. It's really shifting your thinking from kind of reductionism to emergence, from linear to non-linear, from kind of dividing and separating things out to integrated networks, from static to kind of dynamic systems that evolve over time. And that's a bit about systems thinking and how we can start to really think differently. But beyond that, right, it's not just going to be new thinking. Actually, that needs to lead to new ways of organizing. Ultimately, that's what's going to be required to develop regenerative cities. Really going to require kind of structuring of how we organize. Instead of dividing and separating out, is how do we integrate and connect. So yeah, behind our cities are really all these kind of boxes we create. Our organizational structures look a bit like this, and that's a lot of what needs to change. We need to find new ways of kind of organize, new ways of collaborating, kind of systemic ways of collaborating across different systems. It's about integrating different parts of that system to see what emerges when we do that. Going from something that looks like this, all these boxes, to something that looks more like this, creating new ways of connecting people. And you guys are spaces to do that. And that's where our ecosystem exercise today is going to come in, right? It's going to help us think about how do we shift from kind of an ecosystem perspective of the world that actually ends up in those boxes. That's really where it comes from, this mode of thinking. To an ecosystem view of the world that's going to give us a more integrated picture of how all the parts kind of interrelate across the system. So that's that from me. Hopefully it helped in clarifying a little bit about what we mean by systems thinking in this context of regenerative, sustainable, and growing green cities.
Thank you so much, Josh, for giving us a solid foundation on systems thinking and how to apply this for growing green cities. I can assume that there are quite some questions. If there are, please leave them in the chat or at the end in Miro board. Also, thank you, by the way, Jan Leo, for introducing me. I'm the program manager of the Floriade from the Knowledge Exchange. And for the next part of this workshop, I would like to give the floor to the amazing facilitators from Si Amsterdam, Sander, Justin, and Jan Liu. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dina. Hello, everyone. My name is Sander, and I'm part of the Systems Innovation Amsterdam Hub core team, together with my amazing colleagues, Jan Liu, Justin, and Hannah, who are all here to help today and to co-facilitate. We're very excited to be here today at the Floriade Expo with these fabulous Knowledge Academy students who we've also worked with a little bit this morning to do some rich pictures exercises. I've blurred out my screen, but you can see they've hung some rich pictures on the wall behind me on the topic of growing green cities. It is a hybrid event, so you'll probably hear some noises in the background now and then, so be patient with that, please. But we're very happy also to invite you from all over the world to this part of our day, in which we explore the Floriade theme of growing green cities using the ecosystem thinking canvas. Before we jump into the workshop, I'd like to do a small exercise collectively. So I'm going to share a Miro link for the workshop board in the chat now. And you can go ahead and navigate to the Miro and the map of the world. It should be where you start off. And I will share my screen as well. Okay, so just navigate there. And once you've got to this map of the world, we'd like you to take one of these colored pins here on the side and just place it on the place that you are joining us from today. So drag and place it. You probably get a lot here in the Netherlands with all the students here, but hopefully hopefully there's also people joining us from other places in the world. Okay, so hopefully everyone's found their way in and been able to do that. And it might have been a little bit trickier than normal to do. That's because obviously the world was presented to you in probably a slightly different way than you're used to seeing it. So we're all very used to seeing the world map in a particular way, and this map is still the same map but upside down. But you had to take a slightly different perspective of the world, and that's what this workshop is really all about. It's about challenging the way that you look at the world. Now, Joss gave us an excellent overview of systems thinking and how it relates to green cities. And what we'd like to do with you now in this workshop is to collectively take the first step in the process of applying systems thinking, which is to challenge the way we think. And we're going to look at the Floriade theme of growing green cities from two very different perspectives and see how that informs the way that we see complex challenges like growing green cities. And to do this, we're using the Systems Innovation Ecosystem Thinking Canvas, which we've slightly adapted for the purposes of this workshop. And we're going to walk you through it step by step. So don't worry if you don't know where this is going yet, just sort of enjoy the ride. I'd like to just start now with the first perspective, which is ecosystem thinking. And I'll just do everyone to me. So ecosystem thinking. As you can no doubt surmise from the name, ecosystem thinking evolves around the concept of self. It's a self-centered view of the world. Now, that's not necessarily meant as egotistical, though that too can be debated, but simply that the self is placed at the center of perception and understanding of the world. And this means that someone with this perspective sees the different parts of the world and draws a few connections between themselves and those parts. And this is something that's very natural and normal to us. As infants and children, we grow to become self-aware and we draw meaning from that which is outside of us in relation to us, such as our parents, our siblings, our house, or our toys. And as teenagers and adults, we expand our awareness further and further to include more and more parts, such as cultures, geographies, and ideologies. But we continue this way of seeing and giving meaning to our world relative to ourselves. And this way of thinking leads us to act in the interests of ourselves or the parts we see ourselves connected to. So for example, an investor might see the financial system as simply a means to making money for themselves or their company and act accordingly. So ecosystems thinking is a self-centered and a dominant paradigm and mental model, and it's one that focuses on the parts. And as we shall see, it bears certain limitations, flaws, and biases that hopefully we can uncover shortly. So far for the small, short introduction on what ecosystem thinking is. What we're going to do now is we're going to break out into 3 groups to which are going to be randomly assigned. So we're going to do 3 breakout rooms, and each group is going to focus on a different aspect of growing green cities. which are here in our Miro board. So you'll see here on the left is urban food, on the right, urban infrastructure, and on the top here, urban nature. Urban nature will look at sustainable urban development from a flora and fauna perspective. Urban food will look at sustainable urban development from an agri-food perspective. And urban infrastructure will look at sustainable urban development from an industrial and technological perspective. And each group is going to have a facilitator who will guide you through the first round of the canvas, lasting 20 minutes in total. So we're going to be looking at the ecosystems thinking side of the canvas. There's two parts to it, and we're going to do that in 20 minutes. And after that, we'll meet back here where we learned the theory in the ecosystem thinking theory circle for a collective reflection before we move on to the second round. So have fun. Yanlu will open the breakouts now.
Okay, what I will do is send about 8 people to room 1, urban food, facilitated by Sander, and 8 people to room 2, urban nature, facilitated by Justin. And the rest will stay in the plenary, and I will support this group, okay? Yeah, I will just start doing that. And Justin, can you join room 2? Justin? Okay, yeah. So here we are. Hello, everyone. So our group's theme is urban infrastructure. So we'll be spending 20 minutes time to work on the Miro board. And so if you can just look at the Miro board at the group urban infrastructure. And we'll be working on the first session. Hannah, can you help me to actually help people to find the Miro board? Is everybody able to find the Miro board on urban infrastructure? It would be great if you can turn on your camera so I can see you. And okay, great. I see Walter, Thomas. So the first question we'll be working on is that how would someone with an ecosystem thinking perspective see urban infrastructure? And what self-centered relationship might form the totality of their worldview? And what parts might they divide the world into? So if you can also share your thinking in the Miro board. Hannah, if you can help me to I will post a question here in the chat. Okay, I see quite some sharing. So I'll give a few more minutes before I'll invite some of you to share your idea. Hi, Abdurrahman. Welcome. Good afternoon to you. So we're actually working on the Miro activity. Just share the link with you. Okay, great. Yes, we're all working on the question that are addressing the egocentric thinking. Here I will share the question again. So how would someone with the ecosystem thinking perspective see urban infrastructure? So you're in the group of urban infrastructure. And what self-centered relationship might form the totality of their worldview? What parts might they divide the world into? So everyone is invited to post their idea on the post-its and put it on the Miro board under the urban infrastructure group. Is that clear? Okay, great. Feel free to ask me any question and just unmute yourself and ask me any questions. All right, I think I'm gonna invite a few of you to share your ideas. So I will start with the top one. Pressure on farmers. Whose idea is this? Please unmute yourself and talk about it. Pressure on farmers. Anyone? Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you, Hannah. I'm looking at the wrong board. I'm sorry. I've got like multiple windows open here and I'm confused myself. So, okay, I'll go to the third one. Okay, can somebody share? I'd like to have a cheap way of going from A to B to talk about your idea. Who posts that? Please unmute yourself and share.
Know of.
That was me. Hi.
Okay, Dina, yes.
I shared that one.
Emerging actually out of
But
this
there's
mental model.
Somebody talking here. Yeah, so I wrote it actually down because from an ego perspective, if you look at infrastructure within a city, it would be a way of allowing you to go from A to B, for example. And in that sense, you would also look at having it in a cheap way, in a convenient way as much as possible. And that's from a personal mindset. But we could go to another one during the eco part.
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So in terms of the choices of transportation, we think about our own convenience and also price value for cost sort of way. Yes, great. I can turn on the lights in the house. Who posted that?
Come from
that was also me.
Okay.
And it also was related to the fact that we want the convenient part of having lights in the house, food in the house, everything accessible for your own benefit.
Exactly. Thank you, Dina. So actually, this reminds you about the interview I heard from the with the Greta's mother, and she said in Sweden it's always dark, and we just always leave the lights on in the winter. But Greta actually confronted them and say, if you don't need the lights in certain room, why do you leave them on? And they was like, oh, just without thinking, it's just not very cozy. So okay, next one, we need more parking spaces. Who's posted that? I hope it's not you again, Dina.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, it was me.
Okay.
I just wrote down like quotes of an egocentric person thinking, and I was thinking, person with a car in the city will think probably, okay, why can I never park my car where I want to park it close to my doorstep? So that's why I wrote it down. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Thomas. And why does my region not have faster internet yet? That's also mine. Okay. Because I come from a very small village, and I know this is something a lot of people always complain about. Because where I live, like you don't have 3G, like you really have to go to certain spots to get connection. Yeah. Okay. Wow. We don't have a problem here, but I can empathize with that. So next one is unfair energy prices are getting higher. Yeah, and a lot of people are complaining right now. Is the war broke up in Ukraine, and Russian is taking actions towards the EU. So anybody want to share this? Who came out with this post-it? All right, then we'll just move on to the next one. Everyone can build however much they can afford and desire, regardless of its impact on the society.
Yeah, hi, I wrote that.
Tala, yes?
Yeah, I think it's very egoistic in the sense that if someone has the budgets or the capabilities, then they might take over a space, and it's not necessarily, they overtake space, and it's not necessarily for the benefits of the society as a whole.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. So very much like the rich are getting richer, getting more resources, and very much agree with that. So why don't the supermarket outside the city have better products? Who posted that one?
Yeah, it was me again. Yeah,
okay.
I come from a village again, and there we have like supermarkets that grow stuff from the fields around it, and I think it tastes nicely.
Thank you, Thomas. And not caring about the consequence that infrastructure inflicts upon nature. That's a good one. Who posted that one?
That was
Walter?
me.
Yeah, Walter.
Yeah, but I did realize that I was already limiting my thinking process because I only looked at it the way of constructing infrastructure and not the infrastructure that is already there. So that's the kind of view I took. But I think that ignoring the consequences of nature is very ecocentric. And the one next to it that's kind of afflicted and tangled with it, that is making as much money as possible with the cheapest materials for the most profit. I think that's for me the most ecocentrical way of thinking and innovating.
Yeah, so you're suggesting that there are a lot of infrastructure being built with considering the nature, what the nature needs, what impact it might have on the environment and society.
Yeah.
Okay, and thank you, Walter. And energy costs have risen. This need to be less, very similar to the high rising cost of the fuel. Who want to share a bit more about that?
Go in on one of the.
I guess that was mine, but I think multiple people shared it, and indeed it has to do with the fact that we are so import actually reliant with regard to energy, and how we as a country, but also as from a personal perspective, don't look at the relationship and our demands on the bigger whole, but more from our personal benefits. We need energy. The prices have risen without looking at why they have risen, and what you could do with alternative resources. But more the fact that you need indeed have energy all the time in a convenient and cheap way again.
Yeah, Dina, you have taken us to the second round already.
Sorry.
Yes, exactly. So everybody's complaining about the rising costs of not only fuel, but also a lot of things in the grocery, in the supermarkets, and and they don't really look at the underlying kind of costs it generates when you actually lower down the price. So I really like I don't want to share my data. Who posted that one?
Which is again.
That was me again. I'm
sorry.
I got very excited. But it has to do with data can having open data can benefit us, but of course there's also a lot of privacy issues, and in a world where we are ego-centered, we don't want to share our data. And of course you don't need to share your data, but having open data and accessible can also enhance a lot of innovation and make it possible for smart technologies, but that's indeed to be applied.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the open data and data privacy issues has been continuing for quite almost a decade now. So it's indeed a big topic. And I think we'll have time for one more sharing. Is there anyone who has posted something there and I have not invited them to share it yet? If not, and I still want to pick this, there is always construction going on in my neighborhood. Oh, this is noise and dust.
Yeah, that was also me. Also, again, because it's something I hear people complain about a lot. But sometimes construction is necessary for the improvement of the city. So shouldn't always complain.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you for this. Josh, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, a thing about people wanting private things generally, instead of wanting to use public infrastructure, instead of being prepared to share with others, take a subway, they want to take their car or something like this. I think it's maybe an important one also.
Yeah, exactly. So the next exercise we're going to do, we have another 10 minutes or so, is to really kind of map out, see what kind of approaches to urban infrastructure can you actually think of are led by this kind of ecosystem thinking perspective? And also what existing structure are upheld by this paradigm? And what new solution and intervention are currently emerging out of this kind of mental model? So I'll post a question here. So we'll move to the board 2 under the urban infrastructure. And please feel free to post your idea there. So I think I'm going to invite somebody to share. We have 5 more minutes. So I'm gonna start with some posts on the bottom. Cars taking up to 50% of public space in city like Paris.
That was me, actually. It's amazing, isn't it, how much of our public space gets taken over by actual private usage in the end. It's really a paradigm, private mobility, isn't it, and the automobile dominance in our cities. It's quite incredible that almost all the public space, the street, right, with people, pedestrians, the actual public part of it, the bit where we get to walk, is like a narrow 2-meter bit, and then the actual kind of private part of all these machines, the cars, people sitting in them, is actually taking up most of the city space, and that's something we barely even recognize. We're so kind of indoctrinated with that kind of mode of doing transport, and yeah, I think that's something I just became aware of a couple of months back, and it's really a paradigm. Imagine how we could. I think people are starting to see that now, right? Particularly in the Netherlands, right? There's a big movement. I follow one guy on LinkedIn, and he's almost always posting about how, you know, we could use this space, this public space of the road. And literally in Paris, I think it is 50% of the space is taken up by cars. So imagine if we could repurpose that to actual public space, to green space. It would be amazing.
So I noticed everyone is back to the main room, and since we still have a few minutes left, Justin, Sander, would you like to have a very high level summary of the exercise you have done?
Yeah, sure. It was a nice exercise, and our topic was about nature. We had a nice idealistic future from people who want really green solutions, parks, also focus on animals, which was a quite one, to how to shelter and foster cats, and also realized, well, maybe more systems thinking direction already, but how every city has different wildlife, and how to sustain and care for them differently between each other. So that was a nice one. Also about how to deal with parking, and also about sustainable asphalt-less roads. People wanted that, making parks more accessible. And just more nature, green buildings, forest on buildings, forests next to the streets. That was a high level.
Thank you, Justin. Sander?
Yeah, just very shortly before we reflect, I guess, as a group, I think we touched, so our group was on urban food, also interesting process for us, particularly distinguishing between the first part of the exercise, which is trying to understand what the mindsets are that originate out of an ecosystem thinking perspective, and the second part of the exercise, which is looking at what are the structures and the interventions that emerge from that way of thinking. So we looked at how, for example, a sort of profit or efficiency paradigm is sort of the ecosystem based way of looking at agriculture, and that the subsequent structures that emerge out of that are, for example, monocultures, or looking at a clear division between agriculture being rural versus urban cities. So keeping those separated for efficiency's sake. So to be able to scale in rural areas. So there's quite an interesting conversation there in dividing those two. But we also touched a lot upon humans feeling like they're on top of the supply chain, of the food chain, literally, and feeling also that that all organisms must serve them, wanting all kinds of convenience. And of course, from convenience and all food must come to me, we get structures and processes in place like delivery services that are wasteful. We get food boxes sent home. And we had an interesting conversation there, a slight debate about how food boxes emerged from an ecosystem perspective to really serve the supermarkets to sell more to the client and for convenience sake to the consumer, but are now shifting even towards maybe less of an ecosystem thinking approach, because they're becoming a little bit more aware of where the produce is coming from or what kind of food habits and diets it supports. So these were some interesting things that that were highlights for me in our conversation.
Thank you, Sander. And can I invite Dina from my group just to capture what you have heard, because Dina was also very active in sharing her ideas. And we didn't have time to actually share as a group of the intervention and solution. But what I have seen in our Miro board is quite overlapping with the type of mental model that we can really identify in the first place. Dina, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you're actually very productive in terms of idea sharing.
Thank you very much. No, it's true. I looked at it indeed from, if indeed from an eco perspective, to the urban infrastructure. We would think of, okay, how could actually urban infrastructure benefit us to attain the resources that we want, or to make it for us possible to go from A to B in a convenient, cheap way. So access to light, for example, access to public transportation, having a lot of parking spaces, without taking actually into account the broader whole that allows us to have access to these different kind of resources that makes infrastructure usually possible. So that's a bit summarized, but we had a couple of really interesting ones about, from an ego perspective, you would like to have a high internet, a lot of space, cheap energy, these kinds of elements that came back during our brainstorm.
Yeah, I also particularly like your idea about some people's sensitivity around data ownership. Yeah, not willing to share the data and to feed into the open data.
Yeah, there's a lot of privacy that comes along once you think of yourself without understanding the bigger part that you're part of. Of course, because then you only think in this Darwinistic way that Josh earlier mentioned, and about surviving as a self instead of as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you, Dina. So I'm going to give it back to Justin. Would you like to just, yeah?
Yeah, I find it interesting how the future seems a bit, when it comes to nature, quite ideal, and also to shift the discussion a bit more to the ecosystems thinking, is that we had one nice idea about having forests on top of buildings. But there was also one idea about forests more next to the streets and more in parks. So if we would all like think in our own silos and start our own business in the future, and there's one corporation who wants forests in the silos, other one wants to the parks, other ones want next to the streets, we will have like competition, and we have uncoordinated chaos about who and where should we place those forests. And then secondly, there was this different post, which I quite like, is about thinking about the wildlife in these cities, which would then another corporation would we like the wildlife corporation or shelter would also have a different way of thinking about that. Like, should the wildlife be in a park? Should it be next to the streets, or should it be, how should it get on top of the building if that's a direction, and if that's completely uncoordinated from an ecosystem perspective, then you just have a chaotic future. Because how does a cat come up on a building if we would like to have some wildlife there? So we, although all the ideas seems individually very nice, I would like all of them. getting it to like an functioning ecosystem is still a challenge. That's my take.
Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen and I'm hearing an echo. Someone can mute. So I think maybe we've got a few minutes. Maybe we can all meet here in the ego system thinking theory part again, and do take some of these post-its underneath, and it would be interesting for us, but maybe also for you to see what are some of the main takeaways for you. And now, you know, we've shared some of the main takeaways as from our discussions, but what was maybe an aha moment for you during this ecosystem part of the canvas? What struck you? What opened your eyes? What was surprising? Anything that you'd like to reflect or share here, please do so in this space. And if there's someone who wants to share something verbally, of course, please do. Joss, perhaps there was something that was particularly interesting for you as well that you could share with us.
From me?
Yeah, was there something of that experience or in your group that struck you? You've done this canvas a few times.
Actually, we haven't done it in that format, have we? Where you think about how the thinking leads to kind of the outcomes. It's normally just going from one to the other. So interested in that. But yeah, I was actually participating in posting up mail and Siki. So I found it. Yeah, it got me thinking about it. I mean, I guess it's the thing of. We were dealing with public infrastructure, and I guess in that context, it'd be a lot of wanting your own space. So you don't actually, not wanting to fund public infrastructure, not wanting to, you know, partake in public, say, transport and so forth, preferring your own private modes of transport and so on. And the amount of space that ends up taking, you know, we looked at, I don't know if you've seen those graphics of transportation where they have the amount of people you can move in a car versus the amount of people you can move in a train in that space, and you can move, you know, vastly more efficient publicly using that public transport versus the private one, right? And that's really destructive. When we all start using our cars, we all want private something. It really destroys the public space, like with transport. Yeah. And I guess that kind of applies in all these different contexts, doesn't it? In all these public infrastructures, like when people want an ecosystem perspective, is going to kind of take us back to I want my own space, I want my own thing, versus being prepared to kind of share with others and use public services effectively, collectively, which is ultimately much more effective for everyone.
Yeah. I always like to walk in nature and then not see anyone. That's always my goal there, but that's indeed quite challenging when you relate to other people around who also just want to visit nature. That's a very clear one too.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Joss. And indeed, I think the juxtaposition between the perspectives is something that I'm quite eager to jump into now. So I think thanks everyone for sharing. We're not going to point out a few this time. We'll get back to a bigger reflection on eco later. But I think we'd like to transition now to the ecosystem part, and for that, Jan will move us into that mindset.
Thank you, Sander. If I can just invite you to change the screen to a much more serene sort of space where we all can stare at our home, the Mother Earth. So you've been doing quite a lot of work already in the past hour. And now I want you just to take a break, and very short break, and close your eyes and or soften your gaze. Wherever you are, just shift your awareness to your in-breath and your out-breath. Spend a few minutes to do a very short heart meditation by my friend Patrick here. You don't really need to alter anything in your quality of being. If you're sitting on a chair, just shift your consciousness to your feet and feel where your foot soles connect you to our earth, our mother. And then gently shift your awareness to your sitting bones. To the chair or the floor that holds you. If you're standing, shift your awareness gently to the space that surrounds you and keeps you safe and warm. And then gently shift your awareness to the crown of your head, where you may feel a connection into the oneness, the whole, and some call God. And with keeping connection to earth, the space that holds you, and the oneness, you gently bring your attention to your heart area. Sacred heart, where we feel our love and our pain. It's also a place where courage, our courage, lives in. And sense into the feelings and emotions that might be there for you right now, right here. Welcoming them with lightness and self-compassion. And holding them just long enough. Now I would like to invite Dina to read a poem that she has written out of her contemplation from ego to ecosystem thinking. Dina.
Thank you, Jan, for this amazing meditation. It was a moment when I saw the structures upon which my once regarded truth was standing on started slowly crumbling down, and I could suddenly see what has always been, but formerly invisible to me. Waves of evolving streams, changing our regimes, our desires and our dreams, requiring us to transcend, to go beyond, to surpass, as we search for a new compass. But sometimes difficult to comprehend these changes, so we condescend out of faith of what we fail to understand. But we shouldn't descend, nor fall for hatred or fear, because it is love that is ultimately everywhere. Is and was long before I became I, and will remain long, and will remain long after I am not I anymore. For it is I, merely a witness of this magnificent play that we call life. Yes, I remember so clearly that moment, that this eternal truth that I yet cannot grasp, but sometimes in moments of clarity, it manifests itself through kindness and through creativity, a melody, a poem, a design, a gesture, capturing the infinite, and I, merely the instrument. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Now I would like to invite you to open your eyes and just stretch a little bit before we continue our journey to the second portion of the workshop. So when dealing with the size and complexity of the sustainability challenge we're facing today, it is no longer inadequate to focus on our attention on the parts of the system most visible from our vantage point of view, and act in the interest just for ourselves and the parts we see ourselves connected to. This usually results in arguments about who has the right perspective on the problem. Unless we address a fundamental structure of our thinking and motives and shift this to an ecosystem level, the same people will create the same problem, just in a new structure. Ecosystem thinking is to be able to actually separate ourselves from our own point of view and start to see the world from different perspectives and build synthesis of them all. And how do we do that? According to Otto Scharmer, the inventor of famous system transformation model theory U, this requires us to walk on a journey of open mind, open heart, and open will. Open mind means building the capacity to see the world through fresh eyes and suspend old habits of thoughts. Open heart is to empathize and see any situations through the eyes of someone else. And open will is to have the courage and capacity of letting go of old identities, like of us versus them, and letting come of a new sense of self and what that shift can make possible. On top of that, Otto Schama also suggests a threefold revolution on individual, relational, and institutional level. On the individual level, we open up our thinking and feeling so that we can act as instruments for the future that are already want to emerge. We merely act as an instrument and vehicle. On the relational level, we shift from conformity and defensiveness to generative dialogue, so that groups can enter a safe space of listening and thinking together, of collective creativity and flow. And on the institutional level, we open up the traditional hierarchy, centralize the power and competition to refocusing around relationship building and co-creation among stakeholders in ecosystem that can generate well-being for all. Now, I would like to invite all of you to go back to the room you were assigned to in the first round. So I'll open up the breakout room, and please go back to that room, and we continue our exercise on the Miro board with 2 rounds of questions. And your facilitator will share the questions there. I'll open up the breakout room now. For the people who joined the session later, I would share the Miro board link here in the chat, and you will be staying with me in the plenary and under the theme of urban infrastructure. Hannah, maybe you can help me to share the Miro board. Oh, found it here. Okay. Is it easy? Okay. Hello, Hua. You are in the breakout room, urban infrastructure. So we have just shared a Miro board. Please go to the Miro board, and you'll be able to see everyone is sharing the idea. And under the question, how would someone with the ecosystem thinking perspective see urban infrastructure, and what whole system relationship might inform their worldview? And what each perspective might they synthesize to form a holistic picture? Welcome, Frederick. So,
hello.
Hi. So we are all working on the Miro board.
Okay, if I can get the Miro board, and I apologize for being so late. I was working.
You're very welcome. Please go to the Miro board. You are in the group urban infrastructure. So we are already working on the second part of the workshop,
Okay.
and ecosystem thinking. And the question has been posted here. So if you can share your idea in the area of urban infrastructure and ecosystem, think in the green post-its, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any questions, just ask me. Frederick, you are already in the group. This is a group urban infrastructure in the plenary. So you can just go to the board under urban infrastructure. You will see there's a whole picture of infrastructure there.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah. I thought people would be talking to one another. I'll mute myself, or do I?
Yeah, you can mute yourself, and then we all actually work on the Miro board.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
If you can't find it, you just follow me, then you will be.
Yes.
There.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna invite people to share and see. Okay, I'll start with the bottom part. We need to make space for parking garage so that streets free up for more greenery and open space. Okay, anyone want to share this?
Yeah, it was kind of a response to what Joss was saying in the previous section. But yeah, I think the thought of someone you would like to see more greenery can think, okay, if we fix the solution and we make parking spaces, then they don't need to be on the street anymore.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. And there could be an energy generator in a fast flowing river here. Who put the post-its here?
I did.
Okay.
It's from my town. There was or like close to my town, there's also a river flowing. And at some point they did the research on the fish there. And it was actually not a big deal if they would just put an energy generator there, which now supplies like the sports hall and a couple of other buildings. So it's quite small, but it is also possible.
Okay, thanks. So I'm part of the infrastructure, resources flow and towards me and from me. Oh, this is beautiful. Looks like a poem. Who want to share this?
That's me.
Dina, I would know it's you. Sounds very poetic.
But that's actually how I view it. We are a node within a bigger system. And actually, with every action that we do, with every routine that we have, we tap into the urban infrastructure, whether it's putting the lights on, brushing your teeth, opening up the fridge, cooking your food, going to work. You're constantly actually part of the infrastructure that you're collectively creating, but at the same time, while you're having these activities and routines, you also have those resources flowing out of you. You leave a track, And becoming aware of that is what an ecosystem, for me, way of thinking is entails.
Thank you, Dina. I'm really intrigued by this 20 minutes in neighborhood idea. And whose idea is this? Whose post is this?
Is there something out there that's really focusing on that?
That's me. I don't know if you can see or hear me.
Yes, Tia. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, yes, sorry. Yeah, this it's I keep talking about it with my husband. I read about it that if we designed all of our spaces that we live in with the idea that you can access everything you need within 20 minutes, then everybody wouldn't be thinking about commuting so much, that we would start to be sort of more connected to our locality, and we would be embedded into our locality much more if we designed everything with a 20-minute radius.
I love that. I think Miro actually was designed to achieve that. Yeah, so that's why I enjoy living here so much. So convenient, and everybody's so like very well spread. Right? So I think I have time for last bit of sharing. Joss, you want to share something? Or I will pick one.
Well, actually, I was just going to pick up on what Thea said. It's often called the 15-minute city, but yeah, the 20 minutes. It actually goes back to that principle of integration in systems thinking, doesn't it? That instead of separating the parts of the city out and, concentrating, all the residential places there and the office spaces there and recreation there, and trying to do that to optimize those individual parts, we actually think about, okay, how do we put all those parts together, kind of integrate them into this unit where you can have everything that you need in a small space. So just to highlight that kind of idea that I was talking about, integration instead of disintegration, separation. It's just kind of illustrating, and we can see that ideas becoming. It wasn't your idea, Thea. It's quite becoming well known now. 15-minute city in France, they're trying to do it here in London, but it's just an expression of that kind of integration instead of what we were doing before, which kind of separation.
Yeah, thank you, Joss. Yeah, before we move on to the next round, I really want to invite someone who come up with the shared energy to talk about his or her sharing here. Whose idea is this? Shared energy, local water, and ways you reuse. Anyone?
That was me.
Okay,
there's a lot of bottom-up neighborhoods popping up in the Netherlands, but all around the world, in which there's a way of looking more at commons, how to locally produce energy, reuse waste, but also and share this generated energy. But at the same time, also, for example, with regard to clean energy, also the gray and the sewage system, clean the water also locally. And these kind of circular neighborhoods, I would say, are popping up around different parts of the world. And I think this is also part of this ecosystems, keeping actually the flows inside your system instead of having all sorts of externalities.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Dina. All right, we have a few minutes, so we enter into the next round of exercise. So the same question, but from an ecosystem thinking perspective. So what approach have you seen, or what intervention, what solution that are currently in place or emerging out of the mental model of an ecosystem thinking? So what we're doing here is a bit of solution or intervention mapping that you really see, wow, this is really beyond what how we actually operate in the old traditional sort of egocentric model. And this is very inspiring of connecting really people in an entire ecosystem, like our economic activity together, and really co-create and co-sense and co-inspire. So Frederick, and so we'll move to the last part of the board, so you can share ideas with the post-its there. Okay, there are 3 more minutes left, and I'm going to just invite people to share. So I would really love to hear the breaking down education silos, STEMs, humanity, and art and design. And whoever has posted there and really speaks my heart. Can you share?
Hi, that's me again. Yeah, I think that it's so interesting that people are converging on very similar ideas about what we want for the future, but we're sort of struggling with the language and sometimes sort of not, I don't know, doing the same thing maybe 3 or 4 times in all our different silos. So I think if we start with education quite early in breaking down these barriers, then yeah, it'd be helpful for the future.
Thank you, Tia. Yeah, so we start very young. And I want to invite the wildlife person who put a few hearts around post-its, and I think this person really want to share. Wildlife crossing, yes.
I put it on, but I did not put the hearts around it. I am not sure who did that.
Whoever did that must have really big.
That was me.
Yeah.
I like those tunnels.
Yeah, please tell us more.
Well, I think that wildlife crossings are a good example of thinking about the eco-thinking system, because it's not for humans. We don't really benefit from it, and it just stimulates. If there must be a road, at least still think of the nature and the gevolgen, the things that happen after the road has been built, and making such bridges that stimulate the wildlife that still lives there. I think is a beautiful start.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree more. I see similar ideas like a beehive spots and bird bushes and all going into that category. Yeah, and I also see people protesting policymakers. Who's shared that one?
I did. I think in no, not necessarily recent years, but like for the past 10 years, more and more you've seen people like protesting policymakers and saying like, okay, the science is there, we know what to do, let's start actually doing something. Yeah, I think that's becoming more prominent these days.
So being really wanted to be part of decision making, how the policy should be designed, rather than just follow whatever has been put there, conform. So I think we'll have a last minute to share the regenerative development of system. Can somebody share what she or he means? Nobody claimed that one. All right. How about the change of a country's measure of success away from GDP? That's really big.
Sorry, me again. Yeah, I suppose it's a very big, in the iceberg model of systems thinking. It's right under the water. It's something that's kind of really driving some of these inequalities that then drives our sort of ecosystem thinking. So yeah, I don't know what the measure would be, but it would be good to think of something else.
Thank you, Tia. So, okay, do we have everybody in the, okay, I think we still have a few minutes for everyone return to plenary. So I really I'm intrigued by people picking trash in the park. How is that part of the ecosystem thinking?
I think it's taking responsibility in your own hands, and instead of having that egocentric thought like, oh, why is there so much trash? People shouldn't throw trash on the floor. Like people should hire people to pick it up. You just take matter in your own hands and you start doing it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I can't agree more with that. And I actually witnessed somebody threw some trash from a car, and there is a father and son, a very young boy, 5-6 years old, picking them up on the road. And I was actually frustrated by the person who threw the trash from a car, but also very inspired by the people who actually picking up the trash. And so sometimes we don't really want to judge people for whatever they're doing. We just take a step and we to do what we believe is the right thing to do. Anyone else who really want to share before we really wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe I would like to share one because I really like the fact that we're focusing so much also on the social part, about empowered citizens taking ownership and responsibility. And I myself had written down service and access oriented economy, shifting towards from owning a car or a house towards more having access, for example, to sustainable mobility and living. And that really for me shifts the idea from wanting to own something because of fear or whatever, towards actually leasing it or having it as a service. And that's, I think, also part of being in a city, shifting more towards having the service of being able to live a sustainable life instead of having a house.
Yeah.
And or a car. So that's for me also what it entails.
Yeah, thank you so much. See the rest are all return to the plenary. So I'm going to give the floor to Justin for the final,
Yes.
for the plenary reflection.
Yeah, I would like to do it together with you all, but it's first of my group. It was a nice second part as well. I will, if I can share my screen, then we can go to the Miro board. It's yeah, we had quite some different different thoughts about this, looking at through nature from an eco perspective. A lot of talk was more now also about relationships and how do we relate to our external environment, or between humans and humanity, to distinguish in that. We're attracting animals to it, and in our discussion when it comes to the solution space, we also figured out, thought about how we had more difficulties with how do we relate to nature, how do we value it, and how does we also, when it comes to communication, because systems innovation is also more about interaction and giving of talking and communicating. So the one is teaching children, other developments was more about involving citizens. But how do we do this with nature? How do we give a voice to the trees or to the animals? How do we give them inherent value? So that was a nice direction to head towards, to think about. So maybe we can go now to the second group. I will shift it down to urban food. Is it Sander, right?
Yeah, so this time I think we were a lot, because we're used to the canvas a little better, we were able to sort of distinguish more between the mindsets and the mental models in sort of box 3, and the structures and the interventions that come from those mental models. And we're looking in box 3 more at ownership, indeed, sharing, looking at humans being part of nature rather than the central or the apex of natural systems. And from this way of thinking, we're looking at transparency also. From this way of thinking, we translated, or we could find new structures or way of looking at food systems that involve more shared roles, collaborative models, cooperative models in terms of farming systems, but also regenerative models, regenerative agriculture, looking at urban spaces that can mimic biological processes. So we had some very interesting insights in how that could happen, how we can move from an ecosystem way of looking at these food systems and translating them into interventions or other structures. And particularly interesting also was the use of local food tokens. So I think many cities now are experimenting with building alternative food systems that are also financed with different monetary tokens, to try to build an alternative that can, because otherwise it's likely to be co-opted by the existing structure in place. So trying to build an alternative that can thrive alongside existing structures to show a new way of working, or more ecosystem, with a more ecosystem thinking approach. So that was interesting, and I think also more challenging, because of course this is where we want to go. We want to think about these ways of intervening and these structures that need to emerge, but we don't have all the solutions yet. But we could see that this way of thinking hopefully is also stimulating more of these concepts, and hopefully everyone can also now distinguish more clearly between the structures and the interventions that are out there that are based more of an ecosystem versus an ecosystem perspective. Yeah, that's a summary from group 1.
It's a very nice summary. Well done, well done. Let's go then to the last group of Jan.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite Dina to summarize again on behalf of me.
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, I think more or less actually similar things popped up again as in the previous group, shifting really a lot more from with regard to the mental models us humans as a part of this bigger infrastructure from which resources flow to and flow from. But also what I realized is that we focus also a lot more about ownership, responsibility, protesting policy makers, but having also wildlife crossing. So infrastructure is not only for people, but also from all the citizens of a city and its surrounding area. So also nature and the animals, of course, or other living creatures. And we also had a lot more nature-based solutions, looking at collective energy generation and use. More the common side. So here you see a couple of the stars and the hearts on some of the favorites, I think. Bird bushes also. So yeah, you could see genuinely that from the ego to the eco way of thinking, that in this part, nature, but also the responsibility of the human being within the bigger whole was really emphasized.
Nice. It's a very good one. Have you anything to add to that, Jan, or any thoughts?
Oh no, I'm completely in love with the toad tunnel. I've never heard of that before, but it's the first time I heard this, and I actually was really keen to dive into it.
Toad tunnel.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the infrastructure is really not just for human, and they're also for wildlife.
Yeah, tunnel knows two tunnels, two paths, right? Like there's one for humans and one for animals, or one for boats or one for animals.
So maybe with an eye on the time, Justin, we can go to the group reflection like we did last time on the ecosystem thinking.
Yeah. You take over?
I'll share the screen. So as we did last time, oh, I have an echo again.
Yeah.
As we did last time, please come back to the ecosystem thinking. It'd be great if you could share, just drag one of these Post-its. I'll bring everyone to me here. You can drag one of these Post-its into that space, and again, write down something that was an aha moment for you, something that was interesting, something that stood out, something you'd like us to know, anything that came to you from doing this side of the canvas, the ecosystem side of the canvas. We'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll wrap up today's session. Justin can take over and wrap up for us. Is there anyone who really had an epiphany, really a hallelujah or a eureka moment that they want to share?
I had something interesting come up for me. I think I did the first part a little bit wrong, and I was like thinking of all of the solutions that I already know exist. And I think that was still part of my own ecosystem thinking, where I have answers. I'm going to write them on Post-it notes. And then when we did the meditation and entered the ecosystem thinking space, I realized that I was still operating from that paradigm with just another coat of paint on it, which is this like, I have the answer. And then
in the ecosystem thinking, I just had only questions.
Wow.
And yeah, more about being of service to the process. What are the things that should be asked instead of, I know the answer, let me tell you. So.
Wow, that's powerful realization. Very, very strong reflexive response to the exercise. You can see how even a simple canvas like this, or simple model, or simple exercise like this can really challenge you to think about how you think about what are the mental models and the paradigms that you bring to the way even that you go into an exercise with. And fantastic that that's what you take away from today, because that's probably going to put you in a space where you can do that more often when you have conversations about complex issues. Great, thank you so much for sharing that. So Justin, just looking at the time, we've got 5 minutes left. Maybe you can close off for us, and then pass it on to Dina for the final closing.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I really enjoyed the session also with the meditation and a poem in the middle also too. It's nice to cognitively think about these differences and shifting perspective from the ego to eco. Here on the Miro board, you can also give us some feedback and some thoughts. You can also join our community. Dive a little more into resources, so the ecosystems thinking guide, our canvas, and what we would like you to do the most to join us at our community. We having a hub launch where we will walk through the Utrecht's Heuvelrug, so through nature, and we'll have some nice conversations. Yeah, you can follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and you can join us as a hub member. Yeah, we organize a lot of events. There are also other hubs from the network who organize learning sessions, workshops, things like this. Just yeah, be welcome, and hope we can innovate some systems together. And then I'm gonna pass it on to Dina.
Very happy with the people here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us at this Systems Innovation Floriade Collab. Floriade itself is much more than just an international horticulture exposition. You can visit it, it opened last Wednesday, but you can visit it all the way until October. But more than an exposition, it has also an extensive knowledge exchange program where we provide, share knowledge, bring businesses, scientists, education, expositions, and visitors of the expo together, sharing knowledge and growing green cities. You can read a bit more about the program there on the Floriade.com. And if you feel like wanting to know more about the program, you can contact us or subscribe on the form below. Send an email if you want, and follow us through different kind of social media channels. But for closing up, before we finalize the session, I would like to really thank the systems innovation people, to start with Josh Colchester. Thank you so much for your presentation, loved it. But also the facilitators, Sander, Justin, Yalu, and Hannah on the background. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Leave your questions, they can get back to you, and hope to see you soon. Ciao, ciao. Bye.